This Equipment World video is brought to you by Chevron Delo 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash. Hi everyone, welcome back to Equipment World. You're watching The Dirt. I'm your host Brian, and today we're going to talk about one of man's most complex creations ever. We're going to talk about transmissions, which if you've never seen a transmission taken apart, go do yourself a favor and watch a YouTube of someone tearing down a transmission because it's ridiculously complicated. But to help us talk about how to care for such a ridiculously, overly, crazily engineered system, we have Penney Do. She is a product technical specialist with Chevron, and she is going to help us talk about how to maintain and what should be involved in maintaining your transmission. But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its exhaust aftertreatment system has traditionally been seen as an either-or proposition when it comes to choosing the engine oil that's going to protect your system. And that's exactly why Chevron spent more than a decade of R&D work developing a no-compromise formulation. Now, I don't have to tell you why a clogged DPF is bad news, but here's the real kick in the pants. 90% of that ash clogging up your DPF and then upping your fuel and maintenance costs, it comes from your engine oil. You might be thinking, why don't they make an engine oil with less ash in it then? You'll be happy to learn that Chevron agrees with you. They've developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by 60%, radically reducing the rate of DPF clogging and extending the DPF service life by 2.5 times. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system. Now you don't. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology. It's time to kick some ash. Well, Penney, thank you for being on the show today. We really appreciate you taking some time out to teach us a little bit about transmissions.
Awesome, Brian. No, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So my first question is one that might be obvious to some guys on the site, but at the same time, I'm going to ask it because to a lot of people, it's probably not that obvious. What are some signs of a failing transmission?
All right. So generally speaking, operators should be paying attention to any shiftability issues. I think that will be really obvious. So any slipping, trouble getting into gear, and grinding sounds. You could have like maybe burnt oil smells, noises while idling the transmission. It makes noise, but it shouldn't make any strange noises or have any grinding sounds at any point during operation. Fluid leaks. This is why typically transmission fluids are red to distinguish them from other fluids that could be leaking, because it's critical to get that fluid level correct and obviously address any seals and the reason for the leak. And then your check engine light. That's a pretty engineered in indicator that something could be going wrong. And then particularly for construction equipment and whatnot, clutch issues. Clutch packs are far more likely to fail than gears. So you want to be paying attention for clutch slipping or clutch issues in general.
And generally, most of the issues associated with the transmission are going to be shutdown issues, correct? It's not something you just want to power through and just keep right on going until it becomes a worse issue?
I would say so. It's something you want to address right away because it's one of those things that could start as a smaller issue and then quickly progress to catastrophic failure. So you don't want to ignore those key signs. And
as we all know, transmissions are super cheap to replace. So.
Right. Super easy to work on and super easy to replace.
Absolutely.
That's what I hear.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, hydrostatic transmissions have really gained popularity over the last, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 years, if I had to guess. Right. For those of us who are kind of ignorant into the inner workings of a transmission, what are some of the major differences between kind of your traditional geared transmission versus a hydrostatic transmission?
Hydrostatic transmissions rely on hydraulics to do the work, whereas your traditional transmissions, your geared transmissions, rely on those gears to transmit the power to the wheels. So you're relying a lot more on the fluid, and I'll get more into that. But like the no clutch means the hydrostatic transmissions are easier to operate. The the pedal or lever used to control the hydraulic pump can really achieve like that variable speed like very quickly and with no delays. And so it's a wonder they're gaining popularity, just really easy to maneuver. Kind of getting more into the architecture, it uses a hydraulic pump and then hydraulic motors, so that the system typically requires a smaller footprint when compared to a geared transmission. But it's typically not as powerful, not really as efficient, and you don't have the greatest fuel economy. And so you'll typically see them in like smaller pieces of equipment. And then from the fluid perspective, since the fluid is doing a lot of the work, doing the hydraulics, then you want the fluid to have good oxidation control. There's a lot of heat being generated when the fluid's being passed through the pumps and the motors. That'll be one of your main differences. Whereas when you're talking about the geared transmission, the main reason for the lubricant being there is like the gear protection and the cooling, of course. But obviously, for both fluids, you want them to be the proper viscosity, have anti-corrosion properties, good low temperature performance, the anti-wear, and foam control as well.
Gotcha. And so one of my questions about hydrostatic, I've seen some machines have the same tank for hydraulic oil and transmission fluid. I've seen some machines that have separate tanks. Is that just kind of on a per manufacturer basis on how they decide to do that, or how does that work?
Absolutely. I think you'll see with the different, it's hard to make the blanket statements with a lot of these pieces of equipment because, per the OEM, across the different pieces of equipment, the configurations could vary greatly. And so you really want to be, tied to that owner's manual to make sure that you're putting the correct fluids in the right places.
So my next question kind of regarding this is, do hydrostatic transmissions, because they operate in such a different way, do they require any more are they more needy on the maintenance schedule? Is there any special maintenance that needs to be done on hydrostatics versus your traditional transmission types?
So I imagine because the fluid in this case is doing the actual work, it doesn't have the gears doing any of the work, then there is a lot more ask of the fluid. And so, when it's going through the motions of providing that hydraulic power, it's enduring a lot of heat. And so therefore you might get shorter drain intervals and might need to change that out more quickly. But again, defer to your owner's manual.
Owner's manual.
Yeah, that's the theme of
it's a man's best friend on the job. And yet the thing that amazes me, yeah, it should but it amazes me at the same time how many machines you go to reach around the back of the seat to get it and it's nowhere to be found.
I have a pile, I shouldn't admit this, but I have a pile of manuals just sitting, at least they're there for reference, but
just
like
at the ready.
They're ready, but like, do I read them beforehand? And oh man, it's shameful. But these more expensive pieces of equipment, if you want to take care of them and get that longevity out of them, then yes, you definitely should be paying attention and to that maintenance and filters and oil leaks and checking the levels and whatnot. That's all really critical to get the maximum life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of along the lines of getting the maximum life, one of the things that you're always told in the industry is heat is a transmission's worst enemy. So
absolutely.
How important is keeping the cooling stack on the machine clean, not only from, the engine standpoint, obviously that's very important, but in my mind, from the transmission, that's equally, if not more important on keeping that heat way down on the transmission. How does that kind of play into it?
Yes, particularly for a hydrostatic transmission, it's pertinent that those cooling towers are kept clean because you want to try to do whatever you can to extend that lubricant life, therefore your equipment life, to keep the oil as cool as you can. Yes, again, with the hydraulics, you're putting a lot of heat on that oil. It's going to oxidize, and for every 10 degrees over 65 degrees Celsius, your oxidation rate is doubling. And so by keeping things cooler, you are really extending that fluid life.
And so just to kind of clarify for everyone, because I'm ignorant on this stuff as well, when you talk about oxidation, what's happening to the fluid and kind of what's the impact on the transmission? Why is oxidation a bad thing?
So oxidation happens with heat, and it polymerizes the oils and it really thickens it. And so if you're in a hydraulic system and you have a thicker fluid that was intended than it was designed for, then you're going to have a more sluggish piece of equipment. You're going to have fuel economy problems and not be able to do work as quickly as you can. And then you could be harming the equipment life as well. You could be reducing the component life as well.
Interesting. So my final question when it comes to all this transmission stuff, what is kind of as a small dirt company that does our own maintenance, kind of what's the best way to determine when it's really time to change out transmission fluid?
Definitely the default would be to go to the OEM manual and make sure that you're paying attention to what they're recommending. You could consider identifying your duty cycles, whether you're operating rather normally or more severely, and that could impact it. Oil analysis, again, that could be something that the OEM manual can provide guidance for, and then that could help determine when it could be time to change an oil. Good bookkeeping,
Oh, sure.
Particularly with owners of many pieces of equipment, trying to find and establish a good way to document and keep track of the maintenance schedule and what's being put in there, and just staying organized with that would really benefit the maintenance of the equipment and to maximize its life.
Well, and really solid advice, actually, because those of us in the dirt world are known to be terrible bookkeepers and maintenance record keepers.
Well, yeah, administrative work is certainly not fun, but it is required to keep this equipment going. It endures a lot. Yeah, it's dusty outside. That's another thing. Another watch point. Those breathers, getting those checked out and replaced when necessary. They are not feel for life, so you want to be changing those out as necessary. With hydraulic systems, they're typically using those piston pumps, and those have very small clearances. And so having clean oil, clean fluids, and making sure you're changing out those oil filters and whatnot. And
critical.
Exactly. Critical for those small clearances.
So Penny, thank you for being on the show. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure, Brian. It was a pleasure anytime.
Thank you again to Penny and Chevron for allowing us a little time to kind of sit and just work through how to care for these ridiculously, crazily complex contraptions that somehow propel our vehicles and our heavy equipment forward. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. I'm not going to have any answers for you, but hopefully some of our friends over at Chevron might be able to answer some of your questions. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of The Dirt.